All right, we have a full show today, so let's go ahead and get started. My name is Chin Chun, and I'm with NACB and the Consultants Training Institute. I want to thank you for joining us on the March 17th, 2025 round of Valuation World Webcast. That is our disclaimer. Just want to go over a few housekeeping items before we get started. To obtain CP credit, if you have a subscription to Around the Valuation World, please answer all the poll questions that pop up on your screen during today's webcast. CP certificates will be available through your nacb.com portal within 7 to 10 business days after today's webcast. With AVW, try to cover all the current events and topics in the industry. Just with the 2-hour window, we don't have enough time to cover all the topics. So there are links in the material to other resources where you can follow up and read about different information just to stay updated in the industry. And on this page, we do have our correspondents and editors. And with that, I'm going to turn the time over to our editor, Mel and Alina, who will get us started with the program today.
Great, thanks, Chinda. Welcome to this this program, the March program of AVW, and happy St. Patty's Day to y'all. So we've got another great program for you in store. We'll start off with Michael Gregory, as we always do, industry headlines. Lots of good information that come out of that you get a chance to go deeper on. We give you all the resource for that. Then we go into the body of knowledge with the global economic update, which I think is going to be a real interesting perspective with Janae, Castell, and Simon Rubinsohn. And then Stephen White will talk about industry and expert insights and ESOPs. Then Alina will be interviewing Ray Hutchins and Mitch Tanenbaum with respect to cybersecurity and personal protection and valuation. Then Mike Kaplan is gonna kind of moderate one of the favorites, and that is with our judges talking about 10 ways that attorneys kill their own experts. I'm figuratively, not literally. But and then I'll come back and have a conversation with Robert Carter and Stephen Dotterer. We'll talk a little bit about the developments and the changing landscape of ethics and standards within NACFA. And then Ed Mofrad will finish up with AI tools and resources and building a practice. So with that, let's bring Michael Gregory on. He is a regular on the show and on the program, and has been a mediator. He's an ASA, a CVA. He has done valuation work, started with the Internal Revenue Service. He's a wealth of knowledge and a resource, and someone who just is always willing to help out. Michael, so good to have you on the program again. I'll let you take it away from here.
Very good. Thank you very much, Mel. Thanks for that nice introduction. And for everybody, happy St. Patrick's Day. I have my green tie and a green and white shirt here today. So for the love of Mike, let's get started. Go ahead, Chinda. Well, you already know who I am, but here are the things we're going to talk about today. I have 6 different articles I'm bringing your attention from some different sources. A guide to understanding social media influenced income for valuation professionals. That is, how do you value when you have someone who was an influencer on social media? How do you value that? Detecting AI-generated content for you, so you know how others are checking yours out and how you can check out others. Providing support and rationale for the estimation of a company-specific risk premium, one of several articles that Willamette is offering. I'm bringing up one of 3 that they have in their most recent listing. For Pepperdine, a Pepperdine first, the PE multiples are up, but VC, venture capital, are down, and that's a very unusual event. We'll have some commentary on that. Dotterer posts his first data update for 2025, always good information there. And then I took a couple of different polls. One reveals methods and data sources for equity risk premium, and the other is a poll that examines cost of capital methodologies and practice for what different people are using. So our objectives for today: identify what you need to know about social media related to business valuation, recognize how AI detection tools work, and we're going to bring up 3 of them for you, apply appropriate factors for company-specific risk premium, excellent article, consider Pepperdine study information for BV as a backup source, assess Dotterer's information and check that out, and then again evaluating the polls on ERP and the cost of capital. So the first one, a guide to understanding social media influenced income for valuation professionals. First of all, you have to define what is and who is an influencer on social media. So this goes into folks that have an influence, have a following, people check them out on social media. But then what's that worth? And it prevents how influences are impacting this industry. That's something else to check out if you've got somebody who is an influencer in some way, shape, or form. And in the article, they note revenue streams and platform impacts. And they say, consider these are broad categories. People who have subscriptions to this, what kind of advertising revenue? How about affiliate marketing associated with this? Brand sponsorships and sponsored posts for folks that have sponsors. Brand ambassadors. Some people you think of, you know that they're the folks who represent that brand. And then brand merchandise donations. And when those are donated, that can have an influence again on that influencer's value. So understanding the risks, and then what these authors did is they came back and said, here are 12 questions that if you're a valuation professional and you're involved with valuing someone who's a social media influencer, here's the kind of questions you want to ask. So that's more than we can put on here, but this is the source to obtain that information. Detecting AI-generated content. Well, there's a real push. The courts don't want to have AI reports. The courts have come back and said, we want human-authored reports. So how do you know if someone else has AI-authored commentary, or if someone wants to check you out, how might they be checking you out? Well, this article gets into some AI detection tools. We're going to go over 3 with a very brief comment. And then this particular article gets into the mechanics behind AI scoring. So you have a logistic pattern in terms of how you speak, how you write, and you typically use certain kinds of sentence structures and complexities. So AI is looking at that and saying, does this sound like you? And then with that, it comes back and says there's a certain amount of predictability, a certain amount of perplexity that's associated with this. So in terms of stylistic features, it takes a look at all these and then it says, we're going to try and determine if we think this is something that is either you or it's been generated by a human, or this is what AI is generating based on the way it's been written. And the concerns are all AI generated reports and integrity. So let's take a look on the next slide with 3 different sources. Here's Grammarly AI Detector. I use Grammarly personally. And this one says successfully distinguishes between AI and human content. So in at least the tests they ran, that's what the authors found in that example. Here's another one, Phrasely.ai. This one performed poorly. It mistakenly classified AI content as human and struggling with short texts. And then Zero GPT, it showed inconsistent results, correctly identifying human content, but failing to recognize AI-generated content. That's just 3 of them. So, and it doesn't mean they're that good or that bad, it's just that's what they came up with their research. Okay, providing support and rationale for the estimation of company-specific risk premium, or CSRP. This article from Lisa Tran is really well written. She's from Willamette, and she starts off by saying, here's the NACVA factors, and that makes a lot of sense, and that's what the IRS has in their job aid too. And then competitive analysis factors, and then she has what she calls functional analysis factors. And she comments, no matter what, you need to document this in your work files or explicitly discuss this in your report. Then you need to have a reasonableness test. So look at what bonds have and say, where do I fit in with the riskiness relative to those bond ratings? She talks about an advisory, and she gives the citation for the Appraisal Foundation advisory, and then art versus science. So you can look at this and know it is still an art. It's not that this is an exact science, but you need some rationale with response to your analysis. Pepperdine first. And the author is Dr. Craig Everett. He's the director of Pepperdine Capital Markets Project. And in their analysis, I've been following them for years. He says, this is the first year we've ever had this where PE multiples were up and venture capitalist is down. That's a first. So the question is, what happened there? Why is this happening? And here are some of his theories. He says, I believe investors prefer stability and lower risk, profitable companies because they're adverse. Right now, we've got a lot of things going on. Think of Donald Trump and are we putting tariffs on? They're not on. What's going on? And that was at the end of 2024, moving into 2025. So the 2024 studies come out and said, investors are adverse to inherently riskier and more volatile investments in newer venture pursued by venture capitalists. And as risk goes up, interest rates go up. And when interest rates go up, prices go down. So that may be a reason for this. Now, Dotterer, he posts information annually and he gives an update each year. So he's professor at NYU Stern School of Business, excellent academic, wants to stay in academia, but he's got great data. So he's got comments on risk-free rates, equity risk premiums, corporate default spreads, corporate tax rates, country risk premiums, and other data. And he offers this data, he explains it, and he gives you background. It's all free. I subscribe and follow what he does, and I'm encouraging you to do the same. Well, here are these polls, and just very quickly, as you can tell, looking at ERP, for example, here's BVR's cost of capital professional. I'm sorry, first is Kroll Navigator at 61%, and then BVR cost of capital 29%, supply side ERP from Kroll at 26%, long-term historical average from Kroll 22%, Dotterer, who we just talked about with implied ERP 7%, other historical or implied ERP sources about 4%, and others that, or it's not applicable, that's about 9% of the individuals who responded on this survey. The next one takes a look at costs of capital methodologies. And this says most people use the build-up method. That's 54%. 16% use the modified CAPM. 21% use both. 1% use other. And 8%, well, it's not really applicable to what they were doing. And then with that, we'll take a look and say, the poll says the size premium is used 98% of the time. Pepperdine, people take a look at that about 35% of the time to check if it's reasonable on the rate in that range. And do you consider environmental, social, and governance, ECG? 29% of the respondents said they do. They consider ESG. And now here are the sources. Here's a guide to understanding social media influenced income for valuation professionals from QuickRead. Detecting AI-generated content, also from QuickRead. And then here's the Willamette article. And when you go to that site, they also have two others that are very interesting, but I just pulled out one. And then detecting AI-generated content, that also came from QuickRead. From private capital markets from Pepperdine, here's the source to their study. And if you want to check out Dotterer, that's the source to his blog, and you can check that out from his website. These are the sources for this month. I use BV Wire, QuickRead, and Willamette Perspectives. I use all of these in the course of the year. So it's my pleasure to give this to you. That's my contact information. If I can help you in any way, just come back to me, send me an email or give me a call. Be glad to help you in any way that I can. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to you, Mel. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike. It's
Or
great
Alina.
having you. Yeah, it's great having you. So now we have our correspondent, Janae Castell. She will be diving into the latest global economic updates alongside a familiar face to many of you, that is Simon. She's a chief economist at RICS, and he's a recurring presenter, so that's why I just mentioned that he's a familiar face. And they are going to unpack the current state of the global economy, considering how shifting political landscapes are influencing our markets. So I'm pretty sure that it's going to be a very interesting conversation. So welcome, Janae and Simon. And Janae, you can take it from here.
Great. Yes, always a great conversation with Simon. I'm looking forward to getting his perspective and sharing that with you all. So as Lena mentioned, Simon has been on several times. He's extremely knowledgeable. He's extremely experienced. He's over in the UK. And so his perspective is sometimes that of an outsider, maybe an objective outsider. So it's always interesting to hear your take, Simon. To start us off, and maybe for anybody who's been under a rock recently, would you kind of give us what you are seeing, an update or an overview of what you're seeing in the global economic environment?
Well, first of all, good afternoon to you, Janie, and good afternoon to everyone else on the call. Look, it's I've got a slide here which you've probably seen, in various forms, because they're being banded around at the moment for obvious reasons. But there is a lot of, uncertainty around economic policy, and you might argue that, and say, markets tend to like predictable moves in policy. What we're seeing is a bit of a shift from what perhaps was a long-standing approach. Now, you might argue that that is no bad thing at times. Policy gets stuck in its way and perhaps doesn't necessarily respond to changing, economic environment, changing political environment. But nevertheless, however you measure some of these indices try and capture uncertainty in terms of news stories. Some of it actually are a bit more focused on changing actual measures being introduced by governments. But there's no doubt that we are in a very different environment from one we've been in for some time. And just looking at that comment that's come in the chat, yes, the higher the number, the more uncertain the index is. So it's certainly saying at the moment, the background at the moment to policy is at least as perhaps volatile and unclear as it was at the time of the COVID pandemic. Some indices I've seen suggest it's higher. And, it doesn't really matter about the numbers. We're just all aware that from a policy point of view, there's a lot of change, a lot of backwards and forwards, and that is inevitably going to have effect on sentiment and indeed valuation.
Absolutely. We've talked a number of times before on the global picture, and we've talked about how some of the expectations have been buoyed by what's happening in the U.S. economy. Now, our visions or expected growth has been adjusted downward, and especially with what's going on in the U.S. What does this mean? What has changed, if anything?
Yeah, we talked about it when we were thinking about this call, didn't we, Janie? And I mean, it's easy to look at sort of perhaps international bodies and look at when they produce a growth forecast that gets into the national press perhaps more than many others. I wanted to try and capture what's happened since January, because obviously we have had a shift in policy, a notable shift in policy since January. So what I just tracked back on is a consultancy. They are a global consultancy called Oxford Economics. And just looked at how their numbers have changed over the last few months. I've just quoted here January and March. And what you can see predictably is that, when you get that volatility, well, first of all, you get economic uncertainty rising, and then you get volatility in financial markets. It's perhaps not surprising that you do see numbers being revised down. Now, I would make 2 points here. First of all, and perhaps again, it's not surprising that the numbers for this year in the US see the sharpest downward revision. But I would add that the numbers for the US are still better than in most other advanced economies. In fact, I say most, they are better than any large advanced economy. So, when I'm sitting here on this side of the pond, we can only look at your growth numbers and say, well, we would like a bit of that. However, the numbers have come down, and I think that's worth bearing in mind. If you look at the numbers for next year, again, the general trend for advanced economies is lower growth than was previously anticipated. But, I would stress one other point here, and that, there's some talk, you do get a lot of talk about recession because people feel there's a need to always discuss every minute move in or economic release. At the moment, looking at the way things are shaping up, I see very little prospect of a recession at this stage. If you look at the US in particular, corporate balance sheets are in pretty good shape. Consumer balance sheets aren't in bad shape, even though sentiment, you look at the Michigan survey, you look at consumer confidence on the Conference Board survey, they've come back a bit, but those balance sheets are in good shape. And fiscal policy is still pretty supportive of growth. So, there's a lot of talk about, what's going to happen next. I think, we're looking, these sorts of numbers capture the environment, which is the overall, the outlook looks a bit more, perhaps a little bit more sluggish than perhaps was hoped for, at the beginning of the year, the end of last year. But, it's not the sort of adjustment that's actually associated with, a really hard shift downwards.
Yeah, I agree. I think the was it the Bank of the BIS. I think they've also come out and said, looks like soft landing still a base case.
Yeah.
I thought it was interesting too. You mentioned when we were talking earlier about China and the revisions to China, and that they've actually revised downward as well, and we're under the 5%. Do you have anything else that you feel like would be interesting to discuss about China's projections on growth?
Look, I mean, at the end of the China story, there was obviously the Congress last week, I think it was, and there were some stimulus measures announced. I don't think anything that we heard from that Congress was actually a game changer in terms of the Chinese economy. I think we've always got to take Chinese official growth numbers with a healthy dose of skepticism. 5% always seems to be, at the moment, the number that comes to mind when an official projection is put forward. What I'm seeing at the moment from forecasters is that 5 looks on the high side. And, it's not entirely surprising, because tariffs or no tariffs, the Chinese business model was coming under pressure. The whole export-orientated, approach was something that had been incredibly successful. And indeed, obviously, some economies had really benefited off the back of that. And I think when I look at Europe, of Germany as one that had, been a particular beneficiary, exporting all the machinery to make a lot of the goods. But that model is clearly frayed. The legacy of the real estate challenge is still there. The headwinds are still in place. Interest rates probably will fall further, but I don't see the sort of a material uplift in activity in China. And clearly what's happening in terms of the tariff battle, however it goes, and it's going to go, there's going to be many more layers to this over the coming months, but it's not going to be helpful for China. Now, if we look at, there's a lot of research in this slide. I just wanted to showcase some of the research that's being done, because, there's an awful lot around trying to assess the impact of tariffs. Now, look, I'm a fairly traditional economist, and I'm sure there's people on here who will take a different view to me. But generally speaking, I'm not a great fan of these sorts of barriers to trade. Now, in that slide, I note at the top that previous trading arrangements may have been unfair for various parties. And, clearly, Donald Trump has made the point that, repeatedly, that his view is that the US was treated unfairly in previous, pre-existing trading arrangements. And that may or may not be the case. There's clearly a healthy debate about that. But even if that is the case, I think, putting tariffs in place does have, at least in the first order, the first round, it has to have some sort of negative impact. It's going to put up costs in the first order, and that in itself is going to have some impact on activity. So there's a lot of work being done. I've quoted here the Atlanta Fed. I've also quoted a piece of work done by the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston. And, obviously, I could give you a number here, and there are numbers there, but those numbers are all based on the assumptions around what the level of tariffs are going to be. And this is a moving feast, obviously.
Right. So obviously, yeah, there's been a lot of focus on tariffs. There's been, you have some interesting data on what's being looked at with immigration. We can talk about that. But you also brought up a point on consumer balance sheets. Do you want to talk a little bit about immigration first, or you want to go on to?
Well, let's just touch on this very quickly, because I don't want to make too much of this, because the immigration issue is a much wider issue than simply the economy, and it's an issue across Europe as well as the US, and it's there's obviously a very live debate about it. I just thought it was worth pointing out, and it's a fairly straightforward point, but if you slow migration, and slow population growth, you will tend to slow economic growth. And Morgan Stanley are one of the banks that's doing an awful lot of work in this area. Now, slower economic growth doesn't necessarily, mean that people are worse off, because what's really critical is GDP or growth per capita or household income per capita. It's what it is to you as an individual. Growth, GDP as a number is pretty meaningless to most of us, but obviously it is the way in which policy is often conducted. But clearly, I just wanted to showcase the sort of points that Morgan Stanley are making here, that, when we talk about slower growth in the US and elsewhere, if you were building in a more moderate rate of migration, you would expect growth to be slower, at least in the near term. And again, there may be, I'd say, offsetting, advantages of this, and it may have wider merits. But I think you've got to bear that in mind. And inevitably, also in the short term, there is a risk that it could lead to somewhat stickier inflation, simply because you're talking about an environment in which, there isn't going to be so much competition around certain job areas, which will keep wage growth higher than would otherwise be the case.
Great.
So on your next point, I mean, look, without going into this in a lot of depth, I thought, I've raised a few points that, you might argue are drags on growth, at least in the near term. One big plus point, and that's worth mentioning, is the tax refunds that are coming through to households this year. I looked at the inflation adjusted numbers, and they're running at a faster rate than certainly in either the last 2 years. They're also coming through a bit later. There's a bit of a delay on those this year. And that could mean that, we see the benefits of these tax refunds coming through in reasonably significant numbers into April. So we could well see, whether, and I would always caution, I know we had retail sales out of data, and, you can jump around on monthly numbers, and I wouldn't get too carried away about that. The bottom line is, if more money is coming back to households, that is good for their balance sheets. It's good for the way they think about things. Some of this may be used to pay down debt. It may not be used for spending. And that's often the pattern with these things. But that is no bad thing either. So I think it's worth bearing in mind that there's a short-term plus point. The other thing I think it's really important to sort of also put in place is that, a lot of the measures that are being implemented or in the process of being implemented could not be expected to drive growth in the near term. So if the tax cuts that are expiring, are maintained, that and, are made permanent, because that has an important impact in the way that people think about tax benefits, then that could have a really positive impact on growth in the longer term. And, depending on which body you ask to look into something, you'll get a different number. But, one particular group suggested 1% on long-term economic growth. I'm not going to argue that case, but I think, it's worth bearing in mind that amid some of the shorter-term challenges, there may be some benefits. Clearly, and I think this is something we're all very mindful of on this side of the pond again, budget deficits, they do need to be managed. And, it's one thing thinking about higher, benefits or, perhaps tax cuts in the case of the US, higher spending perhaps in other parts of Europe, particularly with defense very high up the agenda. But, an eye on, borrowing costs is really critical.
Very interesting. In that vein, we talked some about Germany, but I think this slide on bond markets. Do you want to touch on the bond markets?
Yeah, well, look, I want to try and bring all of this together, Janie, because, we're thinking about valuations and what might be, supporting valuations going forward. And, we've talked a bit about sort of the macro environment. We have had a very good run in US bond markets, in global bond markets until fairly recently. I should add, of course, that in Germany, we saw quite a big sell-off on the lifting of the debt brake, which I think was entirely, right for them to do if they are going to try and sort of boost defense spending and infrastructure. But we've had a very good run in bond markets. Trying to understand how what that means and what's driving it is always and again quite a complicated area. But when I looked at the break-even rates, it was quite clear that the implied real yield was what was actually pushing this down, and that is concern about economic activity. Now, another point in the chat said no recession. I don't think we're talking about a recessionary environment here. But growth will arguably be a little slower than anticipated, as I mentioned earlier, this year. And if that's the case, then you would expect real yields to be a little lower. The critical thing with all of this is what happens to inflation and what is the inflation story. I'm not seeing people talk about a big breakout on inflation, but I think getting further progress in inflation could be a problem in the short term because of the whole issue around tariffs. We did get a below consensus CPI result last week. That was reasonably good news. But I would take comfort from the fact that, okay, it may be that it's the real rate story that's driving bond yields, but that, it could be worse if the bond market wasn't actually providing that layer of support. And as I say, when I'm looking around at what a lot of the forecasters are saying about bond yields, they're generally not talking about a breakout on the upside, but it may be higher, may be hard to get them significantly low. If you think 4.5%, if you talk about a real rate of around 2%, inflation, is it 2%? Well, you're going to struggle to get to 2%. So you're talking 2.5, 3. So if you were looking at a 10 or 30-year yield in the sort of ballpark of 4.25, 4.5, that wouldn't just rule of thumb seem unreasonable. And if we just wrap up really by going on to the final slide, which is really where does the lead for longer term rates come from? What is the Fed's position in all of this? Well, we got a Fed meeting on Wednesday. I don't think anybody's anticipating a rate cut on this occasion. Will the statement be more accommodating? Probably not. In February, the Fed was quite keen to cool enthusiasm for significant amount of further accommodation from monetary policy this year. At the moment, markets are only betting in probably another quarter point at the back end of this year, but it could change, and if it's possible. I noticed that Jefferies are talking about a Powell pivot. Well, we will see whether that's the case or not. They're arguing that growth, or the lack of it, as I said here, will be prioritized over inflation. And, it's fair to say that, the Fed has always got an eye on the growth environment, perhaps in a way that some central banks around the world don't, actually. If you look at the ECB in Europe, it tends to be rather more focused on the inflation story to the cost of growth. And I think there's always been a bit more balance here. So markets are a bit cautious on interest rates in the near term. Remember, though, to the extent that you're doing business valuations off and using sort of a longer term interest rate, the fact that the Fed isn't running to cut aggressively actually probably supports the longer end of the market in convincing bond investors that the Fed is serious about also trying to ensure that there is no breakout in inflation, given some of the policy shifts that we've talked about.
Okay, very interesting. Always love hearing your thoughts, Simon, and kind of summarizing what we're seeing happen in the news and in coverage and releases by the Federal Reserve and IMF, different factors. So I really appreciate your time as always, and I look forward to next time.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you very much. Nice to talk to you, and have a great rest of the session.
Thanks. Likewise.
Thank you, Janae. Thank you, Simon. I think, Chinda, we've got a... Yep.
Windy Street is a prominent outsourcing firm in India that offers a comprehensive suite of services, including valuation, financial due diligence, accounting, auditing, and tax. Founded 3 years ago, with a clear vision to provide exceptional services to professional and accounting firms, we now proudly serve over 15 clients. Our success is built on our unwavering commitment to the values of trust, quality, and people. Our team of over 150 skilled professionals is led by a highly experienced leadership team. We bring unmatched expertise and dedication to every client relationship. At Windy Street, we believe in putting people at the heart of everything we do, our clients, our team, and our community. We also prioritize complete security and a robust IT infrastructure, ensuring that our clients' privacy and data are safeguarded at all times. With Windy Street, you're not just a client, you're a partner in a journey toward excellence.
All right. On to the next segment with our friend Stephen White. This is going to be a fun one. We're going to talk about ESOPs. We're going to talk about what we need to know with respect to regulations and adequate consideration and those types of things. Stephen has been on the program before. He's a founder and managing partner of Onyx Partners Group. It does a lot of valuations in the ESOP arena. And so, Stephen, I'm going to let you take this one away and
Sure.
jump right in. Good to
All
have
right,
you
well,
here, my friend.
I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to talk about this because, as you know, I have a little passion for ESOPs as well. But I know our segment is short, so I'm going to treat this kind of quickly as if it's the Super Bowl and I'm trying to get the winning touchdown with 2 minutes to go in the game. So I'm going to jump right in to discuss this. What I will start off by stating that there's a lot of information and conversations that's going on between the DOL and ESOPs and how it actually affects us as evaluators. Going back in December of 2024, the United States Department of Labor issued a proposed rules that would govern how we value company stock in an ESOP, which is what spurred a lot of this information and conversation on. But I will say this, that my comments today are not meant to be viewed as taking a position on the current rules that are in place right now. Instead, my goal is to provide you with an objective of the view of the most aspects, or the most important aspects, I should say, of the rules that I will be covering for you today. So over the last 50 years, I would say that ESOPs have been a part of federal legislation. And during that time period, ESOP stocks have been valued without really the benefit of any final regulations. So the DOL has been actively engaged in investigations, along with litigation and reaching process agreements. And with their involvement, there's been differing views as far as whether or not this has been effective of ESOP's formation, meaning that has it slowed down the formation of ESOPs? Have we kind of stymied the growth of ESOPs because of the DOL's involvement? Well, over the last 50 years, there's been a group, the ESOP Association, I should say, not the last 50 years, but over the last couple of years, the ESOP Association has really been involved in trying to put proposed regulations on the table, and it actually happened, right? So the proposed regulations that they put in place have some significant influences and significant impacts as far as how ESOPs goes. And the reason for that is because the regulations that the ESOP Association was working on was really designed to give a little bit more guidance to ESOP trustees, basically fulfilling what is their good faith effort in determining the fair value of the stock price, the shares that are either going to be bought or basically be sold by the overall ESOP. So where does that bring us? So that brings us to the point of January 16th of this year. The Federal Register released a public inspection version of two different proposed rules. One being the long-awaited proposal regulation interpreting the definition of adequate consideration, as well as the safe harbor exemption. Now, the safe harbor exemption is really stimulated for the growth of new ESOP plans, but both would be affected by the determination of the values of the shares of the ESOP transaction. Now, keep in mind, anything that's dealing with the ESOPs, or both of those rules are going to be governed by the Employee Benefit Securities Administration, which is underneath the DOL. For those of you that are relatively new in the ESOP space, I know that you've seen this word adequate consideration, and you probably hear it a few times in other areas of the of valuation. But as it pertains to ESOPs, when we're talking about adequate consideration and as it pertains to the ERISA, it's the fair market value of the asset. Basically, it's just being determined by the good faith by the trustee and the named fiduciary pursuant to the terms of the plan in accordance with the regulations governed by the Secretary of Labor. So the ESOP Association, as I mentioned, they've been spearheading this over the last couple of years. And the reason why they were really involved in this is because of the mere fact they wanted to focus on trying to create something that was more transparent, helping with the language of this particular plan, because it is the necessity of spurring on new ESOP formations in the United States, as well as providing regulatory clarity for existing ESOPs that are out there. Now, the plan that was put together by the DOL, it's a little bit of confusion there. The ESOP Association was involved with it, but it seems like the old administration kind of went in a slightly different direction. So the proposal on adequate consideration, at the time, it did not provide formulas to determine value. So it focused on the process, and that's a word that we're going to talk about very soon. But the process that should be used to arrive at the fair market value. So define that as the willing buyer would pay for a willing seller for investments of comparable risk. Now, most of the elements that are in that proposal are similar to or the same as what the DOL process agreements are with the plan trustees. And you'll see three of the points there. One of them happens to be the independence of primary fiduciary. That's something that we already are familiar with. Regulators would have strongly encouraged the use of the outside independent trustees when they were purchasing shares for any non-ESOP participant. The second one, which is important, but also it's already been enacted, which is the independent valuator. As an independent value, you should have no other business interest or relationship with the plan sponsor, either when they sell it or financial interest when the deal is completed at the price that's acceptable by the seller. I think those two, everybody was really clear on. We understand that has already been acted. For me personally, it was the third bullet point that was pretty interesting in this proposal, was the information provided to the valuator. And the reason why is more important for me is because as a common issue in valuation litigation, it's because of the forecast that is given to the appraiser. They made allegations that it was always too optimistic. So the proposal that was given would have required that the appraiser be in a situation where they carefully assess the reliability of the forecast, as well as the trustee to thoroughly review the process. So I said the process is the key word in this overall process, because the proposal itself, based on their overall process, to give you an example, is that let's just determine if the price is determined to be wrong, right? When they evaluate and they come up with the wrong process, if you follow the right process or the guidance of the overall process, there still would have been a violation. And the flip side of that, if the price were right, but the process that you went through was wrong, that too would have created a violation. So this may be probably one of the most contentious issues of the proposal, because it would have made it hard for plan sponsors as well as the board to rely on the process, because they lacked having internally in that overall process someone with expertise to reasonably second guess it. And that's where expert evaluators in the ESOP space would have been invaluable to them. And as you go through these particular slides, you can see where the current status is as far as the DOL, when they started, how ERISA is involved with this, and why it's important for us. But after January 16th, 4 days later, the new administration comes in. They freeze all pending proposals. They withdrew the proposed adequate consideration, as well as the PTE regulations as well. Now, even though the new administration that is there, they withdrew those rules in January, there is something to keep in mind, is that there's the 2022 Work Act. And for those of you not familiar with it, that act requires the DOL to issue valuation regulations, which is kind of what spurred this whole thing on. So while their fate is basically they withdrew the proposals, there's still some certainty that it might provide some insight to the DOL in the perspective of under how the old administration was thinking, and maybe the way the new administration will look at this. So there is no proposal on the table right now. We're kind of back to where we were, but we do have a new Secretary of Labor, Secretary Lori Chavez. She's there. The ESOP Association is a big fan of hers. They feel as though she will be great for ESOPs. She's an ESOP in favor of ESOPs. And her Assistant Secretary of Labor, which is Daniel Aronowitz, his job as her assistant would be to lead the regulatory of ESOPs at the DOL and the EBSA, which oversees the administration, the compliance, as well as enforcements under ERISA. So what happens now? Where do we go from this? which is really the question. And in my opinion, you just stay alert and kind of see what happens after this, because the rules of the proposal that was placed out there was trying to give a little bit more transparency for us as far as how we value particular stocks. And everyone knows that that's one of the things that's always been a big concern during the litigation, is how we go about valuing the stocks along with the trustees. Now, the association has been spearheading this. They're going to stay a part of this overall. But initially, I think that you have ESOP professionals who trying to encourage the DOL to make a decision, so that way the proposal that you put out there for modern regulation, interpreting the definition of adequate consideration, makes things a lot more transparent and clear. The old proposal that was withdrawn, there were still a lot of concerns with it. The TEA, members of the NCEO, and others out there, they weren't terribly upset that it was pulled back, because of the mere fact that they felt like it may have created more problems than good, because of the risk introducing further confusion that was already there of understanding the adequate consideration. And then also, the regulation also focused on the accuracy of trustees' fair market value determination. You were eliminating different things as far as regulation of the treatment of the stock rights, the control rights, marketability discounts, and warrants. So there's a host of other things out there that definitely needed to be under consideration. It's great that it's being discussed. It's great that we actually have someone in that role at Department of Labor now that can kind of support or speak on our behalf when we're bringing something to the table. But again, my comments are not meant to be viewed and taking a position on one side or the other. Is really focused on just looking at the objective view of the rules that we currently have right now versus old administration, new administration. We just want to make certain things that are a little bit more transparent. So this particular segment was kind of like AVW and Cub kind of merging together, but there's a lot of exciting things going on with ESOP. And for those of you that are in this space, this is truly something you want to keep your ear to the pulse on. And I'll turn it back over now to Alina, or am I going back to Mel?
You're going back to
I
me.
knew it. I figured as much.
It's great having you as always, and very interesting information. So we appreciate having you with us
No
today.
problem. My pleasure.
And
my pleasure.
Thank you. And for all of you that have been asking about the polling questions, Shanda just landed number 2. So I hope you were able to see that one. And now we are going to our next session with us. We have Mitch, and he's one of the nation's top IT and risk management leaders. He's a Cornell graduate in electrical engineering, and he launched his career at Texas Instruments, where he helped develop the first GPS receiver for the U.S. Air Force. He has been recognized for his leadership, and he has served as a CDO, CIO, and CISO for major mortgages and service firms. And he's an entrepreneur. So he co-founded a cybersecurity startup creating technology still in use by the DoD and IoT industries. And today he leads the technical strategy at Hutchins Holding LLC and mentors thousands worldwide in cybersecurity and risk management. And with us, we also has Ray Hutchins. I apologize if I did that wrong. He's also a seasoned entrepreneur, visionary leader, and cybersecurity expert. He was born in Vienna, Austria, and he's global on bringing and time as a U.S. Air Force pilot, where he trained allied and the first female military aviators, and that shaped his discipline forward-thinking approach. So in 2014, recognizing the looming cybersecurity challenges, Ray pivoted again, self-educating in cybersecurity and earning the certification CISSP. This transition led him to partner with Mitch, combining forces to tackle IT risk management globally. Ray leadership extends to influencing national cybersecurity policies, including integrating cybersecurity into business valuations. So that's why this is so important, right? Because we are business valuator, and it is very important for us to understand cybersecurity matters. So thank you both of us for being with us today. And just as a quick questions, how did you get involved in helping valuation professionals grapple with cybersecurity?
Well, that started for us about, well, thank you very much for that very, very nice introduction. Appreciate it. And also, before I answer your question, this first event like this that we've attended with you guys, this is very professionally done, very good speakers. I've loved every bit of it so far. And the background, how you guys run it, put it together was very well done. And so, just from an outsider's perspective, I'd like to compliment the organization and tell the membership that I think they're getting a great value here. So with that,
Thank you.
so you're very welcome. Thank you. But how we got into it, we knew this guy, David Fine, who's in the valuation business, known him for years and know him quite well, as a matter of fact. And so I was talking to him years ago and asked him, I guess it was like in 2020, around 2020, something like that, I guess. And I asked him, are you valuation guys? Are you guys talking about cybersecurity over there? And he said, well, Ray, not much. Okay. And I said, well, Dave, I think, things ought to change, I mean, I think it's, you guys are about risk, right? You value risk. I mean, everything, businesses are sold based on how you figure things out and handle that risk issue. And he says, well, you're right. So he was the one that introduced us to you guys. We wrote an article that was published in your magazine. It was a great article. It was your cover story. It was great. It got the word out there. And then since then, we have noticed, your activity in this field. And, and we applaud you for doing that. But that's how we got into it, was through David. And then coming to understand the important role of the valuator, which, I have used valuators in the past myself. Poor people, I beat them up, trying to get them up on a price, pretty bad, But anyways, but the value, I mean, if you don't have a good valuator, you don't have a deal. So I get that. So that's how we arrived here. Mitch, you got anything more?
Nope, not bad. I think you covered it.
So, based on your experience, what grade would you give valuation professionals on their cybersecurity preparedness?
Okay.
A plus?
So let me tell a story. How about if I tell a little story here? So we presented at your thing in December in Las Vegas, and thank you very much for inviting us. That was great. That was well done. Loved the whole thing. That was great. And so we presented to them. There were like 250 people or something there. Is that about right? Did I have that right? And then you had some level of virtual attendees. And so we presented to quite a few people out there, and we present a lot, to different groups, all different kind of stuff. And so we have kind of you get a pulse on groups and whatnot, And I'd say that if you took the pulse of the defense industrial base, people working for the Department of Defense, that's where you're going to have the most heartbeats per second. Those people are starting to get worried about security over there, okay? And the DoD is coming down on them hard and taking business away from them. I mean, we got someone we know right now who's a past client. He wasn't working hard enough to get his cybersecurity done, and by God, that big firm, it's one of the big five, defense outfits, took their business away from them, and it just blew everyone's minds that they're that serious about this stuff. So we have a pulse on what's going on out there because we do some of this stuff. And when we presented to your group, and you had within your group live, standing right there, you had two people who had lost money. One was at $40,000, the other was $100,000, and they bravely stepped forward. And well, they didn't really expose themselves. No, we didn't use their names. We used their story. Okay, so we didn't use their names, but they were okay with it. They were okay with the stories, and which is great because it was very illustrative of what could happen. So you had those people there, and I know this crowd is an extremely smart bunch, and they care about their money and everything. They're CPAs, they know where the money is, they know how to do this stuff. But I was surprised. We had very little follow-up interest in cybersecurity. Very little. And compared to other groups, well, I'm still kind of mystified. What's the deal here? Because I know they're not protected. I know we're there. So what do we think about how well they're doing with all of this? I don't know. I haven't, they're not all my customers, so I don't know, but I'm worried because of the level of responsibility possessed by the group. Okay. Very important data, very important responsibility, very high trust levels. Boom, boom, boom. A big deal. And they're in the protection of the financial system. They're part of it, right? Protection. If we don't have that financial system intact, man, talk about tear this country up. Be a terrible, terrible thing. So we all have to be kind of fighting that battle. And I'm worried about everybody's cybersecurity, of course, but you guys don't make me feel warm and fuzzy. I don't know.
So
Mitch,
do you think is a lack of recognizing the risk that we have while handling our clients' information, and that's the reason why we aren't aware of the risk?
Well, I think you got two problems there that you have to separate. One is the risk represented by the data that the evaluators have, but the example that Ray gave a minute ago of a business value basically going to zero because the company didn't take cyber risk into consideration appropriately. That's a separate issue. So, in terms of protecting their own information, that's a problem, just like everybody else. You read about all the hacks in the news, and the problem is that evaluators are what Top Gun would call a target-rich environment. If I break into one evaluator, I get all of their clients' data, and a lot of that data is not public, and the risk to the evaluator, is that they wind up getting sued if that data gets compromised. But I think that the other half of the problem is what happens if you misrepresent the valuation because you didn't take cyber risk of the company into consideration prior to making the valuation. For example, and we don't see the news of the small companies, but we do see the news on the big companies. Yahoo sold to Verizon a few years ago. About a week before the sale was supposed to close, it was revealed that Yahoo had a large breach previously that they hadn't disclosed. So what happened? Well, the first thing that happened is the sale got put on hold. Well, that certainly doesn't do much good for anybody, right? The second thing that happened is they reassessed the valuation because they said, well, we didn't know about this information when we did the valuation because Yahoo hadn't disclosed it. And so the result of that was that Yahoo got to take a $500 million haircut in the price. Well, while that was great for the buyer, Verizon probably liked that part. The seller probably didn't like that much at all. Then on top of that, Verizon forced Yahoo to retain liability for the breach. And so now they didn't get as much money and they get to keep the liability. So that's one side where the breach gets discovered before. In another example of an acquisition, Starwood and Marriott, Starwood did not disclose that they had been compromised. Marriott didn't ask the right questions, apparently, didn't know that Starwood had been compromised, didn't discover that Starwood had been compromised until 4 years after the acquisition. Well, now, unless you could go sue Starwood and prove that they knew about it and didn't disclose it, which is really a hard thing to do, now Marriott owns that liability and it cost them tens of millions of dollars. So you got two different stories, one before the acquisition, one after the acquisition, and all that, the evaluator is trying to do the best job they possibly can. How do you go off and make sure that you understand the risk that you're dealing with?
Now, something I did like was that Windy Street commercial that you guys did a little while ago.
Uh-huh.
That company was upfront about its cybersecurity, right up front with it. We've got good cybersecurity. We're on top of this. We're working on this. It matters to us because we know it matters to you. Damn, that's good. That's good. Okay. And that's the way you want to be in your business, whoever you are out there in your business, because you've got a high trust business. If you're high trust, well, go in and establish that trust. I mean, go ahead. You don't want someone asking you, having to come to you and ask you, well, what do you do anything about cybersecurity? And then if someone asks you that question, you want to be able to lay it out, document. You bet we do, and here's how we do it. And you answer the question with great enthusiasm and commitment and purpose, just like that windy street. I thought that's the way to do it.
Great.
Okay, so you've popped this thing up here. You've popped this thing. Okay, we gave this thing away at the at your convention. We had a piece of paper that we laid out on every seat out there, and then we offered this up there as this Lucky 7 gift pack. Lucky 7, remember, Vegas. Okay, we were totally in theme there. And but we gave that away, and it's got good value things in there. Mitch, did anybody ask us for this?
No.
Yeah, I don't remember anyone. I'm going, that's shocking to me. It's like, what? Look what you're getting here. Down here, everyone of them need it. Everybody needs this. And so that kind of that was an indicator in my mind, for your group there. And by the way, down in that bottom right hand corner there of that screen, you'll notice that live. Now that's the way I wish I looked. Okay, that's the way I wish I looked. Okay, that I had that created, but I can do that for you too. Anyway, you can ask that question of that little person down there all the questions you want to about either AI or cybersecurity, and it's got my brain. It's got our brains in it. Very inexpensive to do this stuff. By the way, it's not like a typical IT project. Yeah, you got to know some stuff, but we can teach you how to do it. All right.
Okay, so I guess we are going to learn more of that in our session after AVW, where you're going to be presenting and people are going to have more opportunity to learn and a second chance at enjoying this prizes. Yeah, it was funny because when we went through the website and when you look at the guy looking at us, Mel and I were laughing, talking about it is scary, and I guess that's the way. Without we knowing,
supposed to be. You're exactly right. That thing is scary looking, and that's what we were supposed to. There's supposed to be a little, a little bubble over its head that says, "Ask me, hi, I'm Ray. Ask me a question," kind of thing. And I'm not seeing the bubble. It didn't translate onto this page, but you're exactly right. That is too spooky. Okay.
The thing is that he looks at you, and when you move, his eyes moves. So we were discussing that since this is a cybersecurity presentation, how interesting was that he was looking at us while we were looking at the website, and it was probably the way people, without us knowing, looking at us through our webcams and other ways around when we don't know if we are protected or not. So it was very interesting for us.
The answer is you're not protected. The question is, luckily, this is not a real creep. This is just a fake creep, luckily. But this does represent life right now. Okay, it represents it.
Yeah. So, Mitch and Ray, it was great having you. So thank you for being with us after this presentation. We're going to have Shanda talking more about our next session. So Shanda, you can take it from here. And Mitch and Ray, thank you again for being with us today.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Alina. Thank you, Mitch and Ray. Just as Alina said, we do have them joining us for a 1-hour webinar, which is part of our AVW In-Depth series. With the AVW In-Depth series, we just go to a deeper dive into one of the topics that is discussed during this monthly webcast. So for this month, we do have Don't Gamble with Cybersecurity, Essentials for Evaluation and Personal Info Protection. If you want to join that session, there is a link in the material that you can click on to access that. And then I just want to mention that the next couple of months, we do have a couple others as well. The Lawyer's Business Valuation Handbook, 3rd edition for May. And then June 23rd, if you want to practice business valuation, you have to peel the onion. We do have another one for April. We're still working on that one, but it'll be in the Cost of Capital Pepperdine report as well. So I hope you're able to join us for any of those. And with that, I'm going to turn the time over to Mel, who will get us started with the next session.
Thanks, Chinda. This is such an interesting topic, and like you said, scary. So good. Well, the next segment is one of the favorites. It's with the honorable judges, and Michael Kaplan is going to be the moderator for this session. This topic is going to be really interesting. The ways that attorneys kill their own experts, and subtitle, I guess, how we defend ourselves in this process. So, Michael, I'll let you introduce the honorable judges and take it away, because it's always rich with knowledge and wisdom.
Thank you, Mel. Let me introduce our judges, and these are judges that I know very well and have worked with many times. These guys are just outstanding, and we've learned so much from them. Judge Plant was not able to join us today, but he will be back next time. Judge Christopher Yates, who is an appellate court judge in Michigan, and Judge Timothy Driscoll, a trial court judge from Nassau County, New York, have just been great in terms of educating us on the perspectives on the stuff that we do from the perspective of the bench. From what do the judges see? What are the judges thinking? And there was this one really, really hot area that got a lot of attention when I rolled it out. This must have been at least 5, 6, 7 years ago. I was doing a conference session with Dermot O'Neill, and the topic was, when your retaining counsel is your greatest risk, what do you do? And the first 40 minutes of the session was spent listening to the attendees tell us about these horror stories that they've had in their cases when their own attorneys were doing things that were working contra the best interests of the case, the best interest of the experts. So I'm just going to kick it off with a story that of a case that I had. This was back in 1993. I was a plaintiff's expert. My trial was on Monday. I was invited down to trial on Monday. However, my deposition was taken on Thursday or Friday of the prior week by excellent counsel, major law firm in Los Angeles. And the opposing counsel did a good job of deposing me, but I realized there was really not much that he had gotten. I answer the questions. Whatever the question is, I answer it truthfully. I got to court on Monday, prepared to walk in. I had my whole presentation out. And I was ready to tell the jury, what I was retained to do, my process, what I did, my qualifications and all of that, and my opinion. I get to the courthouse and my retaining counsel pulled me aside and said, "Michael, opposing counsel has brought a motion to exclude you." And I looked at my retaining counsel. I said, "David, what is the problem?" He said, "Well, he's bringing a motion to exclude you because your work and your opinions are different from what I described in the formal expert witness disclosure that I served on opposing counsel." And there's a process where the attorneys will inform opposing counsel, notify them that they plan on calling an expert and that these are the things the expert's going to be testifying to. What happened was when he retained me, he sent me off in a different direction. He gave me an assignment that was very, very different from the assignment, from my assignment as was described in the expert witness disclosure. And the judge granted the motion. The judge granted the motion. Now, okay, the attorney understood. He understood what he did that he shouldn't have done. What I didn't do that I should have done was insisted on reviewing the expert witness disclosure before it was served on opposing counsel. And it's a lesson that I learned from it. In every case after that, before counsel serves it, I want to see it to protect myself. And I have provided input on the recrafting, the rewriting, the rewording of some of them, just so it is consistent. But I'll tell you, now when I'm on the witness stand and I'm in court, or when I'm in deposition and I'm asked the question, well, Mr. Kaplan, have you ever been excluded as an expert? I have to answer yes, because yes is the truth. And then, well, what was that? You know, what was the case about? What was it all about? And then I explain what happened. But it's something I wish I didn't have to explain in the courtroom. But remember, so we as the experts are the ones who are affected by it. It's separate and apart from how the attorney may be affected. So I'm going to bounce this out to our judges, Judge Yates, Judge Driscoll, whoever wants to jump on this one. Have you run into situations like this?
I'm sorry, Chris, go ahead. No, that's okay. Long before Judge Driscoll and I were judges, and we both been judges for a long time, we were lawyers. And in the course of being lawyers, I'm sure we both had plenty of opportunities to work with expert witnesses. Difficulty is that a lot of trial counsel view their experts as plug and play parts. You could just put them in and they say whatever you want, and that's the extent of your involvement with them. I know we've talked repeatedly during these sessions about how experts like you should be used holistically throughout the entire process. And the best I can tell you is that whenever I was going to call an expert, as soon as I contacted the expert, I spent a lot of time talking with the expert about what the expert's opinions would be. I didn't expect that they would be consonant with my view of the case necessarily, but I wanted to find that out in advance. And moving through the case as the evidence evolved, I gave them access to everything. And I don't know how any responsible retaining counsel could do anything other than that. I'll let Judge Driscoll take it from there. But the story you tell, Michael, is horrific, not only because it caused you professional discomfort in the long run, but the client's case was badly damaged by the fact that you couldn't take the stand.
And so how do you cure that? Well, getting back to 30,000 feet, just as the expert testifying in front of the trier of fact, assuming the expert is qualified, is a human dynamic. And we've spoken so often about that. We've spoken so often about the metaphor I use is telling stories around the campfire. So too is the relationship between the expert and retaining counsel a human dynamic. And so Judge Yates has it perfect. Don't let yourself be a plug and play. Take control of that dynamic, and in taking control, give the lawyer the confidence in what you're saying and how you're saying it, that you want this to be a process. You want to assist the lawyer. Now, of course, you're not an advocate, but you want to assist the lawyer. You want to do the best job you can. The only way you can do your job is by getting as much information as possible. You know, we always learn less is more. Less is more, except for expert witnesses. For expert witnesses preparing, more is more. The more you have in front of you, the better off you are. Whether it's more facts about the underlying case, whether, as Michael said, the draft of the expert disclosure, of course, getting the expert report and getting the expert report in a fashion where you can own it. More is more. And if you can convey that to retaining counsel, look, I want to help you here, but I can't help you. I don't know what I don't know. So if you don't give stuff to me, I'm not going to be able to help you with that.
You have led into another really critical error of working with counsel, and an error in which I believe the attorneys will often do things that trip up their experts. And that is the concept of more is more. The attorneys who will tell the expert, you don't have to read all the deposition transcripts. I will just send you the stuff that you need. In fact, I'm going to go through their experts' deposition transcript, or I'm going to go through the defendant's deposition transcript, and I will just send you those pages that you need. No, 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 no. You give me all the deposition transcripts. I will decide which ones I need. And this doesn't stop at deposition transcripts. This is something that kind of spills over into other areas of things that are provided by counsel to the expert. What about experts who intentionally withhold evidence from their experts because they want to kind of manipulate, they want to influence their expert's opinion by keeping certain evidence from them? I'll give you
well, that's really bad. That's really bad. And lawyers who would do that, I think, first of all, I think the market would control, because those lawyers wouldn't get the results they wanted. But you can see Judge Yates and I bristling with that. You know, well, we were lawyers, and we're proud of being lawyers. We love our profession. Mm-hmm. And to think that lawyers would obfuscate the search for the truth is not good at all. And so that would be deeply, deeply troubling to me were I to learn that a lawyer was doing that. And you know, what do we say? Fool me once, shame on me. Fool me twice, shame on you. Or whatever you know. Fool me twice, shame on me. Don't be fooled. Don't be fooled if a lawyer's doing that to you. Look, you're not an indentured servant either. Make sure you don't work with that lawyer again, because that lawyer's going to embarrass you once. That lawyer can embarrass you again, and then it's on you that second time. And it is, as Michael said, it is embarrassing. It is embarrassing. Even though, Michael, I know you know this, that was not your fault what happened years ago, but you're stuck holding the bag to explain it forever. And that lawyer who didn't give you all that information that he was supposed to, that lawyer, that's just another, all right, it happened. The lawyer probably might not even remember it anymore.
Right. 2 points. First of all, the best direct examinations are those where there's a level of familiarity between the attorney and the person who's testifying. And if retaining counsel isn't spending time with you, it's going to come off clunky when the attorney tries to conduct direct examination of you. And the second is cross-examination goes especially well only when the expert or the witness has had plenty of time to think about what the difficult questions are going to be, to prepare, to go over all the materials and be able to answer comprehensively. Obviously, you want to say yes or no, but lots of times you need to add something to that. And if your retaining counsel is limiting your access to information or limiting your access to prep time as you see fit, that's really a recipe for disaster.
So, and you know, in the old days, meaning a year ago, the idea of being deluged by information might be a little scary. Well, we've all spent some time, Judge Yates and I, in the AI space, and you all have spent some time in that. And we've brought that into our lecture in Las Vegas in December. You know, AI can help you sort through volumes of information so much more quickly. So I would say don't be afraid to ask for it in overall, but also there are far more tools available to help you sort through this deluge of information than there would be, you know, even a year ago. And that's just a growing number of tools that are out there.
So here's what happened in a case where the attorney intentionally withheld information from me. This was a dissolution of a law firm partnership. There were 3 partners in the law firm, and one of them apparently on her vacation, her European vacation, billed their largest client $18,000 for services for work. She didn't have time to do $18,000 worth of work. on her vacation, but it appeared on her timesheet. She put it down. The time was billed. When the other partners found out about it, they were livid. They sent a letter to their client saying, we have discovered that there was an inadvertent error last month. There was time that was billed to your account. You will be getting a credit for $18,000 this month. Thank you. Client sent a letter back to them, back to the law firm saying, thank you for letting us know about this. But if $18,000 a time could get by, and it could get onto a bill that's sent out to us, and you're telling us now after the fact, how much time was billed to us over the many years we've done business that nobody caught, and we paid. We paid for it. Thank you very much for all your fine work, but we will no longer be using your law firm. And anyway, the guys ejected their partner from the firm. She sued to recover the value of her interest in the partnership. It was not a big firm. I was brought in to do the valuation. I came up with a value for her interest of $93,000. And of course, I valued it without the revenues from that large law firm. I was at $93,000. The plaintiff's expert came back at $158,000 was his number. So I'm at 98. The other expert's at 158. That case should not go to trial. That case should be settled easily, right? The court-appointed expert came in at 125. The jury came back at 700,000, and the case settled the next day for 900,000. What's wrong with this picture? What was wrong with the picture is that, first of all, the other experts and I, we looked at each other and we threw our hands up. How did this happen? What's going on here? What I learned when I was working on the case, I asked my retaining counsel, please give me a copy of the letter from your client to their large client, notifying them of the error in the billing. Please send me a letter, and please send me a copy of the letter that their client sent back to the law firm. And he said, of course I'll send it to you. It'll be out today. And I never got it. And I asked it for him several times. And as recently as on the eve of trial. And he said, oh, the documents they're in the file in the courtroom. When they open the doors tomorrow, we'll get it to you. This guy was really persuasive. Well, as it turns out, he was withholding those documents from me because the law firm sent a letter to their client saying, our partner, Ms. So-and-so, fraudulently billed your account for $18,000 last month. Well, that word fraudulently apparently took that case and converted it from a pure partnership dissolution into a defamation action. And the court allowed the plaintiff to amend according to proof and add the defamation action. And it was, I mean, it was over at that point. So we're standing out in the hallway after we learned what the jury came back with. And I looked at my retaining counsel. I said, Gary, did you intentionally withhold those documents from me? He said, you better believe I did. I didn't want you to consider those two documents in formulating your opinion of the value. And I'm thinking, oh my God, this guy's playing games with me. And, you know, fortunately, nothing terrible came out of it, but that was a really risky situation. And again, you know, we learn from all of these. Here's one situation, and I'm sure that Judge Yates and Judge Driscoll have run up against this. What do you do when the attorney asks the expert to testify outside of his or her area of expertise. Just step out of the area. Okay, you've given me the value of the business. What is your opinion? What is your gut feeling as to the value of the real estate? And it's just the business.
You ain't gonna do that. You ain't gonna let him do. I mean, you do that, and well, let me back up. Trying a case is difficult as a judge. It's especially difficult for Judge Yates and I, because we were trial lawyers, and we know we did this really well back when we had dark hair, right? Really, really well. So it's difficult to try a case because we know we're really good, and we want the lawyers to, get to it. The idea of trying a case again after trying it the first time is really not fun. And so as a trial judge, you always want to minimize that risk. You increase that risk geometrically by letting a witness essentially violate Rule 702 right before your very eyes and speak about a matter that the expert is not qualified by education or experience to address. So as Michael said, valuing the business and valuing the real estate, well, those are two different levels of expertise. You might have them both, but I'm guessing you probably don't, because it's hard to do business valuation and it's hard to do real estate valuation. So you probably don't have the expertise in both of them. Somebody asks you to do that, the judge is going to be on the edge of her seat waiting for the objection so that you're not going to be allowed to do it.
Yeah, that's a very good point. When I'm trying a case as a bench trial and I'm the finder of fact, I feel perfectly comfortable asking lots of questions and trying to narrow the examination and make sure we cover everything we want. When there's a jury in the courtroom, though, I think Judge Driscoll will confirm this, that all good trial judges try to say as little as possible, because you don't want to move the jury in one direction or the other, and they're always waiting for the judge to say something that they think tips the judge's hand. However, there's an exception to that. And whenever we see something happening in front of us that we believe is reversible error, we will get involved. And there's nothing that looks worse than having the judge step in and say, hold it, going to take the jury out of the courtroom and then say, counsel, why are we in this area? This is not what your expert is here to testify about. You never want that to happen. And some judges will go ahead and do that right in front of the jury, and then you're dead as a lawyer.
For sure.
Well, we have just scratched the surface, because there are many other areas and many other types of things that I've seen the attorneys do that keep expert witnesses awake at night, that give expert witnesses heartburn. And they're all things that we as experts, and I mean, we are experts in valuation. I mean, we've got a lot of good stuff to work with. We've got great education. We've got a lot of experience, and we can't let our retaining counsel lead us in the wrong direction, because those situations, when they blow up, the expert's the one who has to live with them. The expert has to live with it. And I think we are at the bottom of the hour. I want to thank Judge Yates and Judge Driscoll, who are always just very, very insightful, and always a pleasure to work with them.
Yep. Thank you so much, Michael, as always.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Judge Yates, Judge Driscoll, and Michael. As always, just tons of wisdom and knowledge here. Love it. So, with that, we're gonna move to breaking down the experts to ethics and standards and things of that nature. We're going to have a conversation with Stephen Dotterer and Robert Carter. Robert Carter's got enough initials to go across a page twice, but he's the managing partner of Paradigm Forensics and Valuation and Litigation. Stephen is a JD, MBA, CVA, and director of business valuation and litigation support at H2R CPA. So we're going to have a little bit of a conversation, y'all, about standards, ethics, and the changing landscape and the things that are important here. Welcome to y'all.
Oh, thank you.
So good to have you. And I just think that the objective here is for us to kind of summarize and supplement the December panel presentation on this topic when it comes to standards and ethics and everything, and to maybe identify some additional ethics and standards resources for our members. This is, I think, a huge thing for us, because one of the things that really allows us to set ourselves apart is our objectivity and the ethics and integrity in which we operate in, and that environment, and how we keep that intact. But do me a favor, maybe just so people understand your background and your association with NACVA, the standards, the ethics, and how you're involved in this. And then we can kind of take it from there. And I want to hear what you see as important right now in our environment.
Sure. Steve, do you want to go ahead and get started? Sure. I'll jump in. Thanks for jumping on, everybody. As Mel said, I am the chair of the Ethics Oversight Board currently, and we are currently wrestling with a lot of ethics-related issues that have come across the association, especially in the last couple of years. And we're essentially an 8-member body that makes determinations as to ethical complaints that are submitted primarily through the NACVA Association website. And I like that this segment comes after the judges segment, because they always raise a lot of really good points. And some of the things that are discussed in these other sections of AVW are very germane to what we see at the Ethics Oversight Board level. One comment that Judge Yates and Judge Driscoll made that I wrote down was, don't let yourself be a plug and play expert. And I thought that was really valuable from an ethics standpoint, because we do see some instances of that come across the EOB radar. And those can be difficult situations to deal with, because you start asking yourself, is the expert advocating for their professional opinion, or are they advocating for the client? So that's just a little bit of a background on some of the things that we do. Rob, do you want to jump in there?
Sure. So as background, I was previously the chair of the standards board a few years back. So I have a lot of experience in that area and understanding what the NACVA standards are, as well as from the other organizations. And I'm currently the chair of the executive advisory board. And I've been serving as a liaison to the ethics board. So I've been working with Steve over the last couple of years, going through some of these complaints and ethics issues. So that's just my general background in terms of how we've been seeing a lot of these current issues that are coming up. And I think a lot of the problem that we've seen these days has more to do with the professional judgment and people not quite utilizing their professional judgment. Not to get too much into what we did at the conference, but that was one of the big cases we were talking about, was one where an expert was doing their evaluation and not using their professional judgment so much as saying, this is what the client told me, I'm just going to move forward with it and not check that against any of the information I have, and came up with a value that wasn't reasonable. So I think that's a big problem we've been seeing these days.
This is an interesting jumping off point, I think, because I'm curious, why you are starting to see more, why you think we're starting to see more of this happening, this idea that it almost mechanically, because I know when I was teaching a lot, people would ask, they said, well, what's the recipe? What's that flow chart in the recipe? And it's like plug and play almost valuations. And with AI and with some of the online stuff, it makes it sound like that's possible. But from a professional standpoint, I don't know if you have any kind of inclination as to why we're starting to see more of that, and saying, let's put judgment in a jar for a moment and let me just mechanically walk through this process.
Right. I think there's a couple points to it. One, you just hit on, is it's so much easier for people to get in and use AI or use one of those online calculators and maybe not get the training that they need to really operate and do valuations to the level they should be doing them. But I think the other half of it, and Steve, you probably would agree with me, is I know the ethics board has been doing a lot to get information out to the members to understand that these are the issues, this is what you should or should not be doing, and also to get people to complain if there's somebody that needs additional education at some point, and not in a way that it's punitive, But if someone doesn't know what they're doing and they need to be reviewed by the ethics board, I think people are now realizing that that's an option and that people should be sent to the ethics board if there's a problem, more so than there was in the past.
Yeah. Now, so with that, what's the process and the procedures that revolve around the ethics oversight board and some of the things that y'all do and how it affects us and how we can use it to make sure that we're keeping the integrity of our profession and the standards of our work up?
Sure. So I'll jump in there. So we have a document that resides on the NACVA website, and I have a copy of it here. It's called the Standards Monitoring Procedures and Policies Manual. And every case that comes in the door at the NACVA is analyzed according to this document. And this is right under the Ethics and Standards section of the NACVA website. So that document governs how we approach these cases, but typically we get a complaint in the door. We look at the complaint initially at the association level and determine if the complaint was submitted properly and there's sufficient information. Then it goes to the chair, which is me, and I do an initial review of the complaint with another member of the Ethics Oversight Board. And then we make an initial determination as to whether we think there's enough information for the whole board to look at the case. And then we present a brief summary to the whole board. And then the whole board has to vote by supermajority or 6 of 8 whether that complaint proceeds to a formal investigation. So that's kind of an initial look at what the process involves. And that document is about 13, 14 pages on the NACVA website, and that governs how we approach all these matters.
Now, if there's an investigation, and partly I don't know this, and hope I never have to have a conversation with you, but and it's nothing personal. But when there's an investigation, is there remuneration and costs associated with it with respect to the person that's being investigated, kind of like the Board of Accountancy?
Well, there are various remedies that can be applied, and I pasted the link into the chat there to everyone so that everyone can see it. But depending on the severity of the complaint, there are various steps that can be taken. If ultimately it's determined that a violation did not occur, but that the person needs more training, there is a mechanism through which the Executive Advisory Board and the Ethics Oversight Board, respectively, can recommend training. And we have utilized that mechanism in some situations, but there are also situations where the content of the complaint and the investigation results in some egregious findings. And in that case, the violation is posted to the NACVA website and posted in the association news as well.
Awesome. Now, are you seeing a trend in the types of complaints that are coming across your desk?
Unfortunately, I'd say yes. And Steve, we had 3 of them in the last month or so. Unfortunately, they're coming in as more bad behavior complaints, more so than people that are blatantly violating the standards. So people not doing what they're supposed to for their clients or not handling things in an appropriate way. So that's something that the NACVA is taking very seriously and trying to figure out the best way to approach that going forward, because it's not as much of an issue of training as it is maybe they should not be a member, or there's something that people need to make sure that they have the right ethics in general to be in this profession.
Yeah, and I would agree with Rob on that. And one of the areas of concern is attestations. So practical tip, when you attest to your triannual recertification for the CVA, make sure you read all the statements and that your attestation is actually true, because we have seen a number of issues with that in particular. Trish just asked bad behavior related to AI. Actually, a lot of the complaints have not been related to AI, but there is always the concern of plagiarism. So as evaluator, make sure that you're not plagiarizing, because the ability to detect plagiarism with AI, it's now easier to detect as well as it is to plagiarize. So make sure you disclose as much as possible. That's just my advice there.
Awesome. Now, on the website, aside from the link you gave us, there is a set of FAQs, standards FAQs that are on the website. And if we looked at them, what's one FAQ that you think is important to share with the listeners in the audience today, and why?
So I think one of the ones that stands out to me, and there are a bunch of great FAQs that I think everybody should read through at some point, because anything that's clarified or potential issue or things that go to the Ethics and Standards Board tend to get added to this list at some point in time. But the one that I find very important is an FAQ that says, in a litigation setting, does a member's election to perform a calculation provide a safe harbor for the member to not take responsibility for the appropriateness of agreed procedures, methods, and selected procedures, or use of professional judgment? And I think a lot of people would use the assumption of, I did a calculation engagement, therefore I can do whatever I want. That's not the case, especially if it's going to mislead the court. So that's one of those areas where I think a lot of people need to understand exactly what a calculation engagement means, and then use their professional judgment to make sure they're not just ignoring a method because it's the highest method and they want a low value. That is an area that I think is sometimes misunderstood, and I think it's very helpful for people to realize that, you know, there are mechanisms to make sure that you're not misstating your valuation.
And I would agree with that, Rob. And I actually chose a similar one, except I chose it on the non-litigation side, because we get a lot of questions about what's a calc report versus a conclusion of value report. And one common question that's on the FAQs is, can spreadsheets be prepared that are not part of either a calculation report or a conclusion of value report? And the answer is, if you perform a computation, it may be considered other services under Section 3C of the standards, but if professional judgment is utilized, then you have to follow the development standards and the reporting standards for a conclusion or a calculated value. But any service is subject to general and ethical standards. So I wanted to point that out to make sure everybody follows that logic. Another related point is that it is possible to do an oral report and meet all the standards of an oral report, and then supplement it with a memo or a set of schedules to supplement the oral report, as long as the oral report meets the standards of the NACVA. And I'm going to plug the Practice Support Headquarters site as well, which allows you to submit Q&A to the ethics hotline. So if you have these types of issues, the things that the judges mentioned or the things that Rob and I are talking about, this is a portal that not everyone is aware of, where you can submit specific questions and get answers.
And what's the turnaround on some of those answers?
So a lot of times you'll have somebody respond to you within a day or two. So it's
not AI,
great
it's
to
someone.
put something in there and get something back pretty quickly.
Yeah.
At the same time, you're not going to have something where you're going to report out that day and say, I need to talk to somebody right now.
I think it says 72 hours, but it does vary.
Exactly. Now, at the same time, I feel like the NACVA, everyone's always there to help. So to the extent you have somebody want to reach out and call somebody from one of the boards, a lot of times people will take your call. But if you're going to use that hotline, that's the best way to know about it.
So playing devil's advocate, I know we're running short on time here. If I submit a question to this support and I get a response back and I act within the capacity of that response, but then someone files a complaint, how is that handled? Am I protected, if you will, based on what I did if I follow the response?
From the Ethics and Standards Board standpoint, it's typically reviewed by the entire board before a response is going out to you. So a lot of sense, if someone's filing a complaint, they'd have to explain why they feel like that violated the standards that the board has already determined was not a violation. So most likely you would be, but it also means you have to follow what we were actually asked to do, and you didn't.
Facts and circumstances, our favorite term. Facts and circumstances dictate the direction of all these cases, and if you reasonably relied on something, that may be in your favor, but if you misinterpreted or misapplied the recommendation, that can cast it in the other direction.
Okay, great. I know that we're at time. I know that I wanted to touch on some resources, but I think we already did. Poll question number 5 is up, but so we have the practice support HQ standards question. I noticed that you posted in Alina posted in an advisory brief and then Steve, you posted in an ethics document. So, I mean, are there any other resources we as practitioners, as we close out, we should be aware of?
So I think, as we talked about, the FAQs are great. The hotline is excellent. And then there's also an industry and standards course that I would recommend people take at some point during their recertification.
Beautiful, beautiful. Robert, Stephen, I don't think we can get enough of this to keep us on the straight and narrow and keep the integrity of our profession and everything in place. So I appreciate the work you do. Sometimes it's without gratitude, it's a difficult position. But thank you for being here, and thank you for supporting the journey of our members.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mom.
All right. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Alina.
Thank you, Mel. And it is very interesting that a lot of questions were related to AI, and then now we have this next presentation because you maybe saw the name that is a big splash, AI tools and resources, and you may think, well, are they trying me to sell something? But I can tell you that the people that Ed is going to be interviewing in our last session today are people that are all the time looking at AI tools, and they are part of our AI task force. So if you don't know, there is a task force that NACBA is working all the time with AI tools, impact with ethics. So those that were asking questions, just make sure you stay with us during this presentation, because I'm pretty sure that Nick, Nainesh, and Colin are going to be a great addition to this conversation after the Standard and Ethics Board presentation. So Ed, you can take it from here.
Hi. Thank you,
Hi.
Alina, for that great introduction. I'm Ed Mofrad, CPA, CVA, working out of Los Angeles. I have my own practice. And so, yesterday I ran the LA Marathon. So I'm wearing this big heavy metal around my neck. So I'm fairly sore, but otherwise my brain is intact, I hope. Nainesh, it's very, very good to meet you again. I worked with Nainesh and his colleagues, Colin and Nick, before. So it's my pleasure to be here with you again. I interviewed them in Vegas. I interviewed them online before, and we're just a nice compliment to each other. Nainesh, Colin, Nick, very good to see all of you again. And to continue on the conversation, it's my pleasure. Nainesh, I'm going to direct the first question to you. What are the most pressing challenges, if you will, coming across evaluation and forensic professionals? And how does this webinar address them, if you don't mind telling me?
Sure. So thank you, Ed, and good to have this time with Nick and Colin. I think what we are talking about here today is this series of activities that members are going to see from NACVA in regards to artificial intelligence and how to use AI tools and articles around that and presentations and webinar and all the whole slew of activity happening. And so we're going to have on April 30th, we're going to have a big 1 hour free webinar that will get into all of this future activities. And as far as we know, Ed, we in evaluation space, we are the leader. And I think we want to stay that way. So going back to your question, I think time is a big challenge resource for all valuation analysts. And now the question that Colin and Nick and I would like to kind of touch on is, how do you make more time using these AI tools? And our wish is to get into it, in the nitty-gritty of how to use it.
Nick, good to see you again. Obviously, what do you want to add to that, or?
Yeah, I think AI right now is extremely exciting, and I think some of the biggest challenges that we face as practitioners is how to use AI what tools should we be focusing on, and how can we do this in a professional and ethical manner? Rob and Stephen earlier, they touched on, standards and ethics related issues. And what we see out in the field is people are picking up AI tools and are using it, which is fantastic, but they may not be using it in an ethical manner. So right now we're kind of at a precipice where there's a lot of change inside AI, and there's a lot of benefits that we can use and explore. But there's a way to do that professionally and with professional competence and making sure that you're not breaking professional standards. So it's probably one of the big challenges right now, where there's a lot of things that are meeting at the same time. And here at the AIMLC and some of the things that we're doing in the AI Commission, we're trying to help navigate and lead our members through this murky water and provide very clear, distinct training, aids, and tools.
And add just one addition to that. Nick and Colin and I, we are really, we've been at this, using these tools for the last 2+ years, ever since the ChatGPT came around. And we think that our profession and the membership is still not catching up to it. So I'm sure there are a lot of us who are using it, but I think our tool set will be useful for even the elementary user all the way to advanced users. That's our wish.
Yeah, the whole idea of AI obviously is new, and we're still, learning about it and dealing with it, and keep, having our moments of wow, what it can do. Can you give us a real life example of how it interacts with valuation and our field, our business, if you will, a real life situation? It doesn't have to be very complicated or very, lengthy, just briefly.
Yeah, I think.
Nick, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, well, I think one of the coolest things that we've been experimenting with here recently is I do a lot of litigation work. I'd say probably 80% or more of my work is inside litigation. And there's so much change that's happening right now in things like even like ChatGPT. So a quick example is I've created custom GPTs that are very quick. We'll be able to train participants in these future webinars how to create your own custom GPT very, very quickly. And we can upload sanitized reports and start developing cross-examination questions for our counterparts sitting on the other side to help us through trial. So some of this we can actually turn on ourselves and start using GPT to start asking us those cross-examination questions for preparation for trial, make you a little bit sharper and more focused, and help elevate the service that you're providing to your client. And then also, if you're seeing bad actors on the other side, being able to develop cross-examination questions or assisting your counsel with being able to ask those questions and push the other side if you think that they may be falling down an area that they're not following professional ethics or judgment maybe to the way that they need to. So that's probably the clearest, most fun example that we're experimenting with right now, and it's working in real life time.
No, it's fine.
Another example add is we have created internal tools that looks at the whole NSEVA checklist for a valuation report and comes back with the answer telling you what is missing in your report. So there are a lot of good tools. Of course, none of this can be used in silos. You have to have the knowledge to use it.
No, it's fine for us to sit here because we're considered professionals in the field. How about a person who is just brand new to AI? And I mean, we know what we're doing, you know what you're doing, but how we'll be able to teach them those primers, if you will, to deal with this? Do you have a way to teach them?
We actually have a primer course. One of our intro courses on the first rollout will be a short series. Anyone who, no matter your experience level, so you don't have to know anything about AI. That's the great thing about these future webinars that are going to start coming out. We're going to be able to have materials to show you what website to go to, how to sign up, what your cost is, and walk you through that whole onboarding process. So there's a lot of really cool stuff that's with the AI series, but Colin also has some really good information on what he's offering with the AI to help people learn more about that. And I think, Colin, you want to touch on some of the things like the data university that you're bringing forward?
Yeah, so we're really excited. NAC has been putting a lot of time and effort into staying abreast with the changes that are taking place, especially in the business valuation and financial litigation and forensic accounting arena. And we have come up with a new thing that we're launching for the membership. It is called the AI Data University. And is everybody seeing that okay?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm just going to give you a quick overview of it very, very quickly. It's easy to use. If you're confused, you can go ahead and click on Learn More and How to Use, and there's a little video that'll show you how to use it. But as an example, you can search on any of these fields here. You can look for prompts that you can use. You can look for tools and videos and resources. So for example, if I'm interested in looking for some videos or webinars on various topics, I can click on search. It's going to come up with a bunch of different resources that are available for you to use. You can click on the actual resource and then it will talk about it and then show you the actual resource that you have available. You also have the ability to, as an example, we'll just go and let's do some prompts that you could use. You could actually type in prompts and then type in BV as an example. And these are some prompts that you could actually utilize in ChatGPT or Copilot or Deep Search or whatever your favorite tool is these days. And of course, these different tools can be used and utilized by our membership. The other thing that's also it's being built out, and you can actually add your own tools. So you can submit a resource, and that will make it available to the rest of the membership, so that this can become the knowledge source, the knowledge base for the entire BV community. You can take a look at the stats we have currently. We have over 500 resources in there right now, varying from AI tools. We've got prompts that are beneficial for the BV community. And we're really excited to release this. And of course, along with all of that, we do have our AI launch that's coming up here soon, and some of the things that we're going to be talking about, and then I'll be quiet after that. Just very quickly, the typical, consultant client acquisition is you're always looking for clients, then you're spending time getting clients and fulfilling clients, and a lot of the sorry, let me close that down. The webinars that we're going to be having, I'm going to be spending a lot of my time on how to use AI to look for clients and then getting clients. The problem with this model in particular is it takes a lot of time and it doesn't scale well. The only way to scale it is to throw more people at it. And of course, you have to fulfill the clients. And then when you fulfill the clients, you've got to look for more clients and then get clients. And so I'm going to spend my time on looking for clients and getting clients. And I know that Nainesh and Nick are really good at the fulfillment side of things, and they'll be having some absolutely excellent webinars coming up here shortly at our launch. We'll be talking about those more, but that's pretty much it.
When I first joined NACVA back in 2010, I think it was, I know I hadn't heard of AI. I don't know who had, but that definitely was not a reason why I joined NACVA. To think that now NACVA will be providing ongoing resources and support in this regard, it's just an indication of how far we've come. So my question to you is beyond just the elementary level of introductions. What ongoing AI resources and support can the NACVA provide through good gentlemen like yourselves?
We already have lined up. So there is this big announcement webinar that we will have in April. But we have lined up like 8 webinars already, and it's going to happen every other Wednesday. So those are all set up, and our NACVA's intention and Artificial Intelligence and Machine Learning Commission's intention is to continue having that. And so we have the leadership role already, and we going to continue holding that leadership role in artificial intelligence.
And these webinars will be definitely different than your traditional webinar series that you probably ever attended, where usually you have a presenter and you have slides talking about what we're doing. This is going to be a little different, where it's going to be more live demoing and showing you exactly how to do it, and showing you and giving you prompts and giving you the materials much more like what Nainesh and I did in Las Vegas at the Super Conference, where we're actually taking the members through each of those elements, the thought processes, the decision making that goes inside, not just a whole bunch of slides. So it's definitely
this is going way beyond the theories.
Yeah,
we are going to make it practical, where everybody can go back to their desk and use it right away.
And what's the most important takeaway that an attendee should expect to get from, if you were to name just one most important?
Use it responsibly. Use it. That's probably one of the biggest things Nainesh and I did. You know, there's so many different ways to use it, and one of the biggest things that we see, which was already talked about earlier, is professional judgment and ethics. And we wrote a paper, and I just actually put the link in there. We had wrote a paper about AI and should it be disclosed and some of the issues there. We tie everything back in. Nainesh sits on the standards board. I'm a member of the ethics board. The artificial intelligence and machine learning commissions made up of two board members from each of the boards. So there's so many different tools that we can use that are really cool. We just want people to be able to start using it. I know you asked one question, what's the most important, but it's really a two-pronged thing. They should start using it and start using it in a professional manner and understanding some of that umbrella, the way to use it, right? So I think if they start using it and they understand a little bit more about the things to be aware of, they're going to be very successful.
Nainesh, so go and sign up for the webinar.
Yeah,
this is a free webinar. You're gonna learn a lot.
And I know you said it's taking place on Wednesdays, but can you give more details about how interested parties can sign up for it?
I think the most important one that people should know is about the Big Splash event that's coming up April 30th. That's what people should sign up. That's free. Anybody can join, and then they will learn more about what's coming in future.
I see. Well, any more thoughts you want to add to this, gentlemen?
I think I know Alina's thought. Let's end this.
Yeah, we're past the time, and I know I'm gonna get the wrath if we don't finish soon. So, Alina.
And it was interesting that while the presentation was on, it was Copilot asking Colin, "How may I assist you during this time?" So yeah, AI and machine learning is everywhere. And we really appreciate Nainesh, Nick, and Colin just talking about this. So make sure you join that webinar. It's free. And they are spending a lot of time making sure that we as members have all the information needed to learn AI, use it, and use it in a correct way. And as Nick said, professional judgment, very important. So thank you everyone for joining us. You are invited to attend next month's broadcast. It's going to be April 21st. So hopefully we will see all of you there. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.